Maya Rodriguez never expected to find hope lying broken behind a crumbling brick wall. The 15-year-old had been searching for aluminum cans in the abandoned lot when she heard the soft whinnying, weak and desperate. What she discovered changed not only her life, but touched the hearts of an entire city. A wounded chestnut mare, barely clinging to life, would become the bridge between a girl who had lost everything and a family she thought was gone forever. But could their bond survive the harsh realities of street life? And would anyone believe that sometimes miracles come in the most unexpected forms? Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the forgotten corner of downtown, where Maya Rodriguez picked her way through scattered debris and broken glass. The shelter's breakfast of lukewarm oatmeal and stale toast sat heavy in her stomach as she searched for anything valuable enough to trade for a few dollars. Her worn sneakers, held together with duct tape and determination, crunched over brittle leaves and discarded fast food wrappers that had blown into the abandoned lot behind Morrison's old textile factory. The October air carried the scent of decay and forgotten dreams, mixing with the acrid smell of rust and weathered concrete that seemed to permeate every corner of this forgotten place. Maya had been living at Riverside Community Shelter for 8 months now, ever since her grandmother's funeral and the subsequent loss of their tiny apartment. The social workers had tried to place her with relatives, but her uncle Roberto lived in a studio apartment, barely big enough for himself, and her Aunt Carmen had made it clear that taking in a teenage girl wasn't in her plans. The foster care system loomed like a dark cloud, so Maya had learned to make herself small, invisible, just another face among the rotating cast of temporarily displaced souls who called the shelter home. She had mastered the art of avoiding eye contact with the overwhelmed staff, of claiming a quarter cock before the evening rush, of stretching meals, and making herself useful enough to avoid unwanted attention from caseworkers who might decide her situation needed more permanent intervention. The abandoned lot stretched behind the textile factory like a forgotten graveyard of industrial dreams. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete with stubborn determination, creating a patchwork of green against the gray landscape. Rusted machinery parts created an obstacle course of twisted metal and forgotten purpose, their original functions lost to time and neglect. Maya had discovered this place 3 weeks ago while following a mangy orange cat that had been hanging around the shelter's back door. She'd named the cat Rusty and had been leaving scraps of food for him, though she hadn't seen him in days. The lot offered a strange kind of peace, removed from the constant noise and activity of the shelter, where privacy was impossible and quiet moments were rare treasures. It was Rusty she was thinking about when she heard the sound that made her freeze in place. A soft, plaintive whicker drifted from somewhere behind the partially collapsed brick wall that had once separated the lot from the adjacent property. Maya's first thought was that someone had left a radio playing, but the sound came again, weaker this time, unmistakably the voice of an animal in distress. The sound tugged at something deep in her chest, a recognition of pain that resonated with her own carefully hidden wounds. She approached the wall carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. The bricks had tumbled in places, creating gaps large enough to squeeze through. Sharp edges caught at her clothing as she navigated the opening, and she had to duck under a precariously hanging piece of metal roofing that groaned ominously in the morning breeze. Maya peered into the shadowed space beyond and gasped, her breath catching in her throat at the sight that greeted her. Lying on a bed of dirty straw and scattered newspapers was a horse, a beautiful chestnut mare whose coat had lost its shine and whose ribs showed clearly beneath her dull fur. The animal's left front leg was swollen and bent at an unnatural angle, and her breathing came in shallow, labored pants that misted in the cool air. Dark stains on the straw suggested that the injury was serious, possibly infected, and the mare's eyes held a glassy quality that spoke of fever and pain. Despite her obvious suffering, there was something regal about the animal, a dignity that hadn't been broken by whatever circumstances had brought her to this desperate place. Maya had grown up visiting her grandmother's friend Elena, who kept horses on a small ranch outside the city. Those summer afternoons seemed like a lifetime ago now, but she remembered enough to recognize that this mare was in serious trouble. the horse's eyes, dark and liquid with pain, fixed on Maya's face, with an intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through to her soul. In that moment, something passed between the abandoned girl and the wounded animal, a recognition of shared suffering that transcended species. Both of them had been left behind, forgotten by a world that had moved on without them. "Easy, girl," Maya whispered, sliding through the gap in the wall with careful movements. She moved slowly, remembering Elena's lessons about approaching injured animals. "I'm not going to hurt you." The mare's ears flicked forward, and she attempted to lift her head, but the effort seemed to exhaust her. Maya knelt in the dirt beside the horse, noting the way the animal's coat stuck to her sides with dried sweat and the concerning warmth radiating from the injured leg. Up close, she could see the extent of the mare's condition more clearly. Her hooves were overgrown and cracked, her mane was tangled with burrs and debris, and there were other smaller cuts and scrapes that suggested she had been living rough for some time. The space behind the wall had clearly been used as a makeshift stable, though it was barely adequate for housing a large animal. Someone had spread straw across the concrete floor and rigged a tarp overhead to provide some shelter from the elements, but rain had seeped through in several places, creating muddy patches that smelled of mildew and decay. A dented water bucket sat in one corner, nearly empty and green with algae, and scattered horse pellets suggested that someone had been caring for the mare before abandoning her. The setup was heartbreakingly inadequate, a desperate attempt to provide care without proper resources or knowledge. Maya's mind raced with questions as she took in the scene. Who had kept a horse here in such conditions? Why had they left her behind? And how long had the poor animal been suffering alone in this improvised shelter? The answers seemed less important than the immediate need staring her in the face. This beautiful creature was dying, slowly and painfully, and Maya was possibly the only person who knew she existed. Maya spent the next hour simply sitting with the mare, talking to her in soft, soothing tones, while trying to assess the extent of her injuries. The horse seemed to find comfort in the human presence, her breathing gradually becoming less labored, as Maya's voice washed over her like a gentle tide. The mare would occasionally try to nuzzle Maya's hand with her soft muzzle, a gesture that broke her heart with its gentle trust. Here was an animal that had every reason to fear humans, yet she still sought comfort from the young girl who had stumbled into her prison. Maya examined the injured leg as carefully as she dared, noting the heat and swelling that suggested serious damage. The break appeared to be old, perhaps weeks or even months, and had healed badly without proper veterinary care. The surrounding tissue was inflamed and tender, and Maya worried about infection setting in if it hadn't already. She had no medical training beyond basic first aid, but even she could see that the mare needed professional help that was far beyond Maya's ability to provide. As the afternoon wore on and the shadows lengthened across the lot, Maya knew she had to make a decision that would change everything. She couldn't leave the horse here to suffer and die alone, but she also couldn't afford veterinary care, and bringing attention to the situation might result in the mare being put down if her injuries were deemed too severe or too expensive to treat. The weight of responsibility settled on Maya's shoulders like a familiar burden, one she had carried since childhood when adults had proven unreliable and she had learned to depend only on herself. All her life, Maya had been the one others turned to when things got difficult. When her grandmother had fallen ill with diabetes, Maya had been the one to make sure she took her medications and kept her doctor appointments, reading medical forms and insurance papers that confused the older woman. When the bills piled up after the funeral and the landlord demanded rent that Maya couldn't pay, she had been the one to try to negotiate with creditors and social services. Even though she was just 14 and had no legal standing or real understanding of the adult world she was thrust into, the pattern of her life had been one of carrying burdens too heavy for her young shoulders, but she had never resented it because the alternative was watching the people she loved suffer. Now, faced with this wounded animal who had no one else, Maya felt that familiar weight settling over her once again. The difference was that this time, her decision would be made purely out of love, without the complications of duty or obligation that had characterized her relationship with her ailing grandmother. That evening, Maya returned to the shelter with her mind made up and her heart heavy with the magnitude of what she was contemplating. She would find a way to help the mare, even if it meant risking everything she had managed to build in her precarious existence. She lay awake on her narrow cot in the women's dormitory, listening to the sounds of 30 other women and children trying to find peace in sleep. Rosa Gutierrez, the night supervisor, had been kind to Maya since her arrival, offering small gestures of care and understanding that meant more than the woman probably realized. But even Rosa's patience would be tested if Maya started bringing home injured animals and disappearing for hours at a time without explanation. The dormitory was a symphony of human struggle played out in sleeping sounds. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had lost her apartment when her Social Security wasn't enough to cover rising rent, whimpered softly in her dreams. Jennifer, a mother of 2 whose husband had left her with nothing but debt and eviction notices, tossed restlessly while her children slept curled against her sides. Sarah, barely older than Maya herself, clutched a photograph of the baby she had given up for adoption when she couldn't provide adequate care. Each woman carried her own weight of loss and disappointment. But Maya had learned that shared misery didn't always translate to shared compassion. The next morning dawned gray and drizzle, with low clouds that seemed to press down on the city like a heavy blanket. The weather was perfect for Maya's purposes, providing natural cover for her activities and keeping other people indoors. She slipped out of the shelter before breakfast, carrying a small backpack filled with supplies she had quietly gathered over several days. A bottle of water from the communal kitchen went unnoticed among the dozens that were consumed daily. Some leftover bread rolls were easy to pocket when the volunteers were distracted by more demanding residents. A small first aid kit had been borrowed from the shelter's medical station during a volunteer shift helping Rosa organize donations, and Maya had managed to add some antibiotic ointment and bandages to her BA collection. The process of gathering supplies had required careful planning and patience. Maya had learned to be invisible in plain sight, moving through the shelter's routines without drawing attention to her activities. She volunteered for kitchen duty and cleaning assignments, making herself useful while quietly observing where supplies were kept and when they might be accessed without notice. The guilt of taking things that weren't hers weighed on her conscience, but she told herself that the need was greater than the theft and that she would find a way to repay the shelter somehow when her circumstances improved. The mare was still alive when Maya returned to the lot, though she seemed weaker than the day before. Her breathing was more labored, and she hadn't touched the sparse grass that grew in patches around her makeshift shelter. Maya set to work immediately, her movements efficient despite the emotional turmoil in her chest. She used the water to clean the wounds around the horse's injured leg, working gently to remove debris and dried blood that had accumulated over days or weeks of neglect. The mare flinched at the initial contact, but didn't try to pull away, seeming to understand that Maya was trying to help rather than cause more pain. The trust implicit in that acceptance moved Maya to tears, and she had to pause several times to compose herself as she worked. The injuries were worse than she had initially realized, with signs of infection that made her stomach clench with worry. Maya applied the antibiotic ointment with gentle fingers, murmuring encouragement and apologies as the mare endured the necessary treatment. Maya fashioned a rough splint from pieces of wood she found in the debris scattered around the lot, using strips torn from an old t-shirt to pad the hard surfaces before securing them in place with the bandages. The process was awkward and imperfect, but it was better than nothing, and Maya could see immediate relief in the mare's posture once the injured leg was properly supported. Working slowly and carefully while murmuring encouragements to her patient, Maya began to see glimmers of the beautiful animal this horse had once been, beneath the layers of neglect and suffering. "I'm going to call you Esperanza," Maya told the mare as she worked, testing the name on her tongue and finding it felt right. "It means hope in Spanish. My grandmother always said that hope was the one thing nobody could take away from you, no matter how bad things got." The horse's ears flicked at the sound of her new name, and Maya imagined she saw approval in those dark, intelligent eyes. The name felt like a promise, both to the horse and to herself, that they would find a way through this crisis together. Over the following weeks, Maya developed a routine that revolved entirely around caring for Esperanza, organizing her entire existence around the mare's needs. She would wake before dawn and slip out of the shelter while the other residents were still sleeping. navigating the dark streets with the confidence of someone who had learned to move unseen through an indifferent world. The early morning hours were precious, offering privacy and peace that allowed Maya to focus entirely on her patient without fear of discovery or interruption. Maya brought water and whatever food she could manage to procure, learning through trial and error what Esperanza could and would eat. She discovered that horses could eat certain fruits and vegetables, and she began haunting the dumpsters behind grocery stores with new purpose, looking for produce that was past its prime for human consumption, still edible for her patient. Apples with soft spots, carrots that had lost their crispness, and leafy vegetables that were wilted but not rotten became treasures in Maya's new economy of survival. She also discovered that several restaurants in the area would give her their old bread if she asked politely, and explained that she was feeding a sick animal. The managers and staff who agreed to help seemed touched by her dedication, though Maya was careful not to reveal too many details about her situation or Esperanza's location. She learned to time her requests for when the restaurants were busy with closing procedures, when staff were more likely to hand over bread rather than spend time asking probing questions about her circumstances. The hardest part of her new routine was keeping the secret that was consuming more and more of her mental and emotional energy. Maya found herself making excuses for her absences, claiming she was job hunting or attending GED classes at the library, when Rosa or other shelter staff asked about her activities. The lies came easily, perhaps too easily, but Maya told herself they were necessary to protect both herself and Esperanza from well-meaning intervention that might result in separation or worse outcomes for both of them. Rosa began to eye her with suspicion, particularly when Maya started looking thinner as she shared more and more of her own food with Esperanza. The shelter meals were hardly adequate for a growing teenager under normal circumstances, and Maya's habit of skipping meals or eating only half portions to save food for the mare began to show in her appearance. Dark circles appeared under her eyes from early mornings and late nights, and her clothes hung looser on her already slight frame. Other shelter residents noticed her distraction and the way she always seemed to be hurrying off somewhere with a sense of purpose that set her apart from the aimless wandering that characterized many of their days. Maya had learned long ago how to deflect questions and keep her own counsel, but the constant vigilance required to maintain her secret was exhausting. She found herself snapping at people who tried to engage her in conversation, then feeling guilty for her rudeness toward people who were dealing with their own struggles and didn't deserve her misdirected anxiety. Esperanza's condition gradually improved under Maya's devoted care, though the progress was slow and sometimes seemed almost imperceptible from day to day. The swelling in her leg began to subside, and her coat started to regain some of its natural luster as proper nutrition and regular grooming worked their subtle magic. More importantly, the light returned to her eyes, and she began to whinny with excitement whenever she heard Maya's footsteps approaching. The sound became Maya's reward for all the hardship and sacrifice, a daily reminder that her efforts were making a real difference in the life of a creature who had been forgotten by the world. Maya found herself talking to Esperanza about everything, the fears and dreams she had never been able to share with another living soul. The mare became her confessor and confidant, a non-judgmental presence who listened without offering unwanted advice or false reassurances. Maya told her about her grandmother, Maria Rodriguez, who had raised her after Maya's parents died in a car accident when she was 7. She described the small apartment they had shared, filled with the scent of Maria's cooking and the sound of her favorite telenovelas playing on the old television that had been their primary source of entertainment and connection to the outside world. She talked about the night Maria had passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving Maya truly alone in the world for the first time in her life. The discovery had been devastating, not just because of the loss of the only family member who had truly cared for her, but because of the immediate practical problems that followed. Maya had been too young to inherit the apartment lease, too poor to maintain the rent payments, and too proud to immediately seek help from social services that she knew would result in foster care placement with strangers. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm fooling myself," Maya confessed to Esperanza one particularly difficult morning when the mare seemed listless and uninterested in food. "Maybe I'm not helping you at all. Maybe I'm just making things worse by keeping you here instead of getting you real help." Esperanza lifted her head and gently nuzzled Maya's cheek, a gesture so tender and filled with trust that it brought tears to the girl's eyes and renewed her determination to continue fighting for both of them. As autumn deepened into winter, Maya's secret became harder to maintain on multiple levels. The temperature dropped steadily, and she worried constantly about Esperanza's ability to stay warm in the makeshift shelter that was barely adequate for mild weather, let alone the harsh conditions that were coming. She began bringing old blankets and newspapers to help insulate the space, layering them around the mare's resting area and stuffing them into gaps in the tarp overhead where wind and rain could penetrate. But Maya knew it wasn't enough, that her improvised improvements were merely delaying an inevitable crisis, rather than solving the fundamental problem. The mare needed proper shelter with solid walls and adequate ventilation, nutritious food in consistent quantities, and medical attention that Maya simply couldn't provide on her own no matter how much love and dedication she brought to the task. Maya's own health was suffering from the constant stress and physical demands of her double life. She was losing weight at an alarming rate, and Rosa had begun making pointed comments about her appearance and behavior that suggested intervention might be coming whether Maya wanted it or not. The crisis came on a particularly brutal December morning when Maya arrived to find Esperanza lying on her side in the straw, breathing heavily and refusing to eat even the sweet apples that usually tempted her appetite. The horse's eyes were dull with fever, and Maya could feel the heat radiating from her body, even through her winter coat. Panic seized Maya's throat as she realized that her beloved friend was seriously ill, possibly dying, and there was nothing she could do to save her with the limited resources at her disposal. Maya spent the entire day beside Esperanza, trying every remedy she could think of while fighting back waves of helplessness and despair. She brought cool water to help lower the mare's temperature, soaking rags and laying them across Esperanza's neck and forehead. She sang the lullabies her grandmother had sung to her during her own childhood illnesses, Spanish songs about guardian angels, and peaceful dreams that seemed to soothe the suffering animal even when Maya's voice cracked with emotion. She prayed to every saint she could remember, bargaining with forces beyond her understanding for just a little more time, promising sacrifices and devotion in exchange for Esperanza's recovery. As evening approached and Esperanza's condition continued to deteriorate, Maya faced the hardest truth of her young life. Love alone was not always enough to save someone, no matter how pure the intention or how desperate the need. That night, Maya made a decision that went against every instinct for self-preservation she had developed over months of living on the margins of society. She couldn't watch Esperanza suffer any longer, and she couldn't live with the knowledge that her pride and fear had prevented her from getting help when it was needed most. Even if it meant losing the horse she had come to love more than her own safety. Even if it meant exposure and possible separation from the one relationship that had given her life meaning, she had to find someone who could provide the care Esperanza needed. The weight of that decision settled over Maya like a physical presence, making her chest tight and her breathing shallow. She had spent so much of her life being let down by adults who made promises they couldn't keep, who offered help that came with strings attached, or conditions she couldn't meet. The idea of voluntarily placing herself and Esperanza at the mercy of a system that had already failed them both was terrifying. But the alternative was watching Esperanza die, while Maya clung to a stubborn independence. That served no one. The next morning, Maya approached Father Miguel Santos, the elderly priest who volunteered at the shelter and had shown particular kindness to the younger residents. Father Miguel had always struck Maya as someone who understood that desperate situations sometimes required unconventional solutions, and his presence at the shelter suggested a commitment to helping people that went beyond conventional religious duties. She found him in the shelter's small chapel, kneeling in morning prayer before a simple wooden cross that seemed to glow in the filtered light from the room's single window. "Father Miguel," Maya said quietly, not wanting to disturb his devotions, but knowing she couldn't wait any longer. "I need help, and I don't know where else to turn." The priest looked up at her with kind eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul, taking in her obvious distress and exhaustion with the practiced compassion of someone who had spent decades ministering to people in crisis. He was a small man with graying hair and hands weathered by decades of service to his community, but his presence radiated a calm strength that made Maya feel like maybe, just maybe, everything would be all right. Maya told him everything, her words tumbling over each other in her desperation to make him understand the full scope of the situation. She described finding Esperanza, the weeks of secret care, and the mare's current crisis with a detail and emotional honesty that she had never shared with another human being. Father Miguel listened without interruption, his expression growing more concerned as Maya's story unfolded, but never showing the judgment or dismissal that Maya had feared might be his reaction to her unconventional situation. When she finished, tears streaming down her cheeks and her voice hoarse from the emotional effort of confession, Father Miguel was quiet for a long moment. Maya held her breath, preparing herself for lectures about responsibility or practicality, for well-meaning but ultimately useless advice about accepting reality and letting go of impossible dreams. Instead, the priest rose from his knees with a slight wince that spoke of arthritis and advancing age and placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "Show me," he said simply, his voice carrying decades of quiet authority and compassion. "Take me to this horse of yours, and let's see what we can do." Maya's heart nearly burst with gratitude and relief at those simple words, at the implicit trust and acceptance they represented. Together, they walked through the gray morning to the abandoned lot, Father Miguel following Maya through the gap in the wall with surprising agility for a man of his years, and an absence of complaint about the unconventional circumstances. Esperanza was still lying on her side when they arrived, but her breathing seemed a little stronger than it had the night before, as if she had been waiting for this moment of revelation and rescue. Father Miguel approached the mare slowly, his movements gentle and unthreatening, speaking to her in soft Spanish that seemed to calm both horse and girl. He knelt beside her and placed a weathered hand on her neck, murmuring a quiet blessing that acknowledged the sacred nature of all suffering creatures. "She's beautiful," Father Miguel said softly, his eyes taking in the makeshift shelter and the evidence of Maya's devoted care with an understanding that encompassed both the inadequacy of the situation and the love that had created it. "And she's lucky to have found someone who loves her so much." He stood and pulled out his cell phone, scrolling through his contacts with the efficiency of someone who had spent years connecting people in need with resources that could help them. "I know someone who might be able to help us," he continued, his fingers moving across the phone's screen. "Dr. Patricia Vance runs a veterinary clinic on the other side of town, and she's helped me with animals before. She has a good heart and sometimes donates her services for cases like this when the need is genuine and the circumstances are compelling." End quote. Maya held her breath as Father Miguel made the call, listening to his side of a conversation that would determine Esperanza's fate and possibly her own. He explained the situation with a diplomacy that made it sound like a routine request for assistance, rather than the desperate plea it really was, emphasizing Maya's dedication and the bond between girl and horse, while downplaying the irregularities of their living situation. When he hung up, he was smiling with the satisfaction of someone who had just arranged a small miracle. "She'll be here within the hour," he told Maya, his face bright with the joy of answered prayers. "And she's bringing everything she needs to help Esperanza get better." Maya felt her knees go weak with relief, and she had to sit down in the straw beside Esperanza to keep from falling. The mare seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, lifting her head slightly and regarding the priest with curious interest. Dr. Vance arrived with 2 assistants and a van full of equipment, transforming the abandoned lot behind the crumbling wall into a temporary veterinary clinic with professional efficiency. She was a woman in her 40s, with prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and kind eyes that reminded Maya of her grandmother's friend Elena from those long-ago summer afternoons. She worked with quiet competence, examining Esperanza thoroughly, while explaining to Maya what she was doing and why, treating the teenage girl as a partner in the mare's care rather than an obstacle to be managed or dismissed. "She's malnourished and has been fighting off an infection for some time," Dr. Vance concluded after her examination, her hands gentle but thorough as she assessed the extent of Esperanza's various ailments. "But the leg has healed remarkably well, considering the circumstances and the lack of proper veterinary care during the critical healing period. Someone has been taking very good care of her." "Ha." She smiled at Maya, who felt a flush of pride despite her anxiety and exhaustion. "With proper treatment, she should make a full recovery. Dr. Vance continued, her words carrying the weight of professional authority and genuine optimism. It's going to take time and consistent care, but I don't see any reason why she can't return to full health and normal activity. Maya felt tears of relief streaming down her face as the veterinarian outlined a treatment plan that offered hope instead of the euthanasia she had feared. The treatment involved antibiotics to fight the infection, the fourth fluids to address dehydration and malnutrition, and round-the-clock monitoring for the next several days while Esperanza's system recovered from weeks of inadequate care. Dr. Vance arranged to have Esperanza moved to her clinic, where she could receive proper treatment in a warm, clean environment, with all the medical equipment and supplies necessary for a full recovery. Maya rode in the transport van, holding Esperanza's head in her lap, while the mare was carefully loaded and secured for the journey across town. The clinic was a revelation to Maya, who had never seen a veterinary facility designed specifically for large animals. Clean stalls with soft bedding, proper lighting and ventilation, and the quiet efficiency of trained professionals created an atmosphere of competence and care that was the opposite of everything Maya had known in her recent Brel life. At the clinic, Maya refused to leave Esperanza's side, despite Dr. Vance's gentle suggestions that she might want to rest or return to the shelter for a proper meal and sleep. The veterinarian, recognizing the depth of the bond between girl and horse and understanding that separation might be traumatic for both of them, arranged for a cot to be placed in Esperanza's stall so Maya could stay with her patient throughout the critical first phase of treatment. For the first time in months, Maya slept deeply and peacefully, lulled by the familiar sound of Esperanza's breathing and the knowledge that her friend was finally getting the care she needed. The steady rhythm of medical equipment and the occasional soft conversations of night staff created a symphony of healing that soothed Maya's exhausted mind and body in ways she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death. Word of Maya and Esperanza's story began to spread through Father Miguel's network of volunteers and parishioners, carried by the kind of grassroots communication that characterizes tight-knit communities responding to compelling human interest stories. Within days, people were stopping by the clinic to check on the horse's progress and to meet the teenage girl who had risked everything to save her. The visitors brought small gifts, words of encouragement, and most importantly, the validation that Maya's love and sacrifice had been worthwhile and recognized by others. Local news reporter Jennifer Chen heard about the story through a contact at the shelter and asked if she could interview Maya for a human interest piece about kindness and compassion in difficult times. Jennifer had built her career on finding stories that highlighted the best of human nature, and something about the bond between a homeless teenager and a wounded horse struck her as exactly the kind of story her viewers needed to hear in a world that often seemed dominated by negativity and division. Maya was initially reluctant to speak to the media, worried that the attention might somehow result in Esperanza being taken away from her, or that exposure might bring unwanted scrutiny from social services agencies that could separate them permanently. The idea of sharing her private struggle with strangers felt vulnerable and frightening, like opening a wound that had barely begun to heal. But Father Miguel and Dr. Vance convinced her that sharing their story might help other animals in similar situations and could potentially bring in donations to help cover Esperanza's mounting medical expenses, which were accumulating faster than Maya could comprehend. The cost of emergency veterinary care, ongoing treatment, and proper boarding was far beyond anything Maya could ever hope to repay, and the financial burden was becoming a source of anxiety that threatened to overshadow the joy of Esperanza's improving health. The interview took place in Esperanza's stall, with Maya sitting cross-legged in the fresh straw while the mare stood nearby, finally strong enough to remain upright for extended periods. Jennifer Chen proved to be a sensitive interviewer who drew Maya's story out gently, helping her articulate the emotions and experiences that had led to this moment without sensationalizing the hardships or exploiting the vulnerability of a teenager who had already endured more than her share of adult problems. "What made you decide to help Esperanza instead of just walking away?" Jennifer asked, her camera operator capturing the tender interaction between girl and horse with the unobtrusive skill of professionals who understood that their presence should enhance rather than distract from the authentic emotion of the moment. Maya was quiet for a moment, stroking Esperanza's neck while she gathered her thoughts and searched for words that could adequately express the complex mix of recognition, compassion, and desperate need that had driven her actions. "I guess I saw myself in her," she said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion that flickered across her face. "Both of us had been abandoned and hurt, and nobody seemed to care what happened to us. I couldn't save myself, but maybe I could save her. And maybe by saving her, I could prove that we both deserved to be saved." 2. The story aired on the evening news 3 days later, with follow-up pieces running throughout the week as public interest grew, and the station recognized they had stumbled onto something that resonated deeply with their Beatty audience. The response was immediate and overwhelming, surpassing everyone's expectations and demonstrating the power of authentic human connection to transcend the barriers that usually separate people from each other's struggles. Donations poured into Dr. Vance's clinic from viewers who had been moved by Maya and Esperanza's story, far exceeding the cost of the mare's medical care and creating a fund that would ensure her long-term welfare. People sent money, supplies, and offers of help from all over the region and beyond, proving that compassion could spread as quickly as any other powerful emotion when given the right catalyst. A local feed store donated a year's worth of horse food, and a construction company volunteered to build a proper shelter if a permanent home could be found for Esperanza. But the most surprising response came from Maya's own family, people she had written off as indifferent to her welfare and uninterested in maintaining any connection to her or her grandmother's memory. The news story had included Maya's full name and the circumstances that had led to her homelessness, information that traveled far beyond the local viewing area through social media and internet sharing that expanded the saga. Stories reach exponentially. On Thursday morning, Rosa from the shelter received a phone call from a woman claiming to be Maya's aunt, Carmen Rodriguez, calling from Phoenix, Arizona, with a voice thick with emotion and urgent with purpose. Carmen had seen the news story through a friend who had shared it on social media, and the recognition of her niece's name and face had hit her like a physical blow. "I saw the news story about my niece," Carmen said, her words rushed and broken by emotion. "I had no idea she was living in a shelter. We thought she was with social services, being taken care of properly. My God, what have we done?" The conversation that followed revealed a family tragedy built on misunderstanding, poor communication, and the kind of assumptions that can destroy relationships when people are dealing with grief and crisis. Simultaneously, Carmen explained that after Maria's death, the family had been overwhelmed by their own grief and the practical difficulties of dealing with the estate and funeral arrangements. Everyone had been struggling with their own problems and responsibilities, and in the confusion and emotional chaos that followed the funeral, everyone had assumed someone else was taking care of Maya's placement with Cress. Appropriate authorities. When weeks passed without contact, they had convinced themselves that no news was good news, that Maya was settling into a good foster home and building a new life without needing reminders of the painful past they all shared. "We were cowards," Carmen admitted to Rosa over the phone, her voice breaking with the weight of delayed recognition and regret. "We were dealing with our own grief and problems, and it was easier to believe Maya was fine than to face the reality that she needed us. But seeing her on the news, seeing what she's been through, and how she's managed to not just survive, but actually help that poor horse, I realize what an incredible young woman she's become, despite everything we failed to give her. We want to make this right." The reunion took place at Dr. Vance's clinic, with Esperanza serving as an unwitting mediator in a family reconciliation that might never have happened without the catalyst of shared concern for an injured animal. Carmen had driven straight through from Phoenix, arriving with red-rimmed eyes and a heart full of regret that had been building for months of willful ignorance and delayed responsibility. Maya's initial reaction was cool and guarded, the protective walls she had built around her heart firmly in place after months of learning that adults could disappoint as easily as they could promise. "Where were you 8 months ago when I needed you?" Maya asked, her voice carefully controlled but carrying an edge of pain that had been sharpened by countless nights of wondering why no one had cared enough to check on her welfare. "Where were you when I was sleeping on the streets because the shelter was full? Where were you when I was eating out of dumpsters and wearing the same clothes for weeks because I had nowhere to do laundry and no money to buy anything new. Carmen's face crumpled with shame and sorrow, the questions hitting her like physical blows that she knew she deserved but was unprepared to handle. There's no excuse for what we did, Maya. No explanation that makes it right or takes away the pain we caused by our neglect and cowardice. We failed you when you needed us most, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I want to be part of your life if you'll let me. I want to be the family you deserved all along. The conversation was difficult and emotional, with years of hurt and misunderstanding to work through, and trust that had been broken by abandonment and indifference. Maya had learned to protect herself by expecting nothing from adults, and Carmen's sudden appearance felt more threatening than comforting to someone who had survived by depending only on herself. But gradually, as Carmen shared stories about Maya's parents and grandmother, and as Maya began to see genuine remorse and love in her aunt's eyes, the walls began to show cracks that let in the possibility of healing. The breakthrough came when Carmen mentioned that she had always regretted not having children of her own, and that taking in Maya wouldn't be a burden but a blessing she had been too afraid to embrace when it was first offered. I was scared, Carmen admitted, her voice breaking with the weight of delayed honesty. Scared that I wouldn't be good enough, that I couldn't replace what you had lost or measure up to the love your grandmother had given you. But watching you with that horse, seeing the love and dedication you've shown, I realized that you don't need someone to replace your grandmother. You need someone to support the amazing young woman you've already become. The decision to move to Phoenix with Carmen wasn't easy for Maya, representing a fundamental shift in everything she had known and planned for her immediate future. It meant leaving the city where she had lived her entire life, saying goodbye to Father Miguel and Dr. Vance and the other people who had become important to her during the most difficult period of her existence. Most challenging of all, it meant being separated from Esperanza, who was finally healthy enough to be discharged from the clinic, but still needed a permanent home with proper facilities and ongoing care. The logistics of Maya's new life were complicated by practical considerations that neither she nor Carmen had fully anticipated. Maya would need to transfer her school records, complete paperwork for her change of guardianship, and adapt to living with a relative who was essentially a stranger despite their blood relationship. Carmen's life in Phoenix would also require significant adjustments to accommodate a teenager with her own needs, preferences, and traumatic history that couldn't be erased by good intentions alone. The solution to Esperanza's housing problem came from an unexpected source that demonstrated how the story had touched people far beyond its original scope. Dr. Vance had been following the developments closely and had grown deeply attached to both Maya and Esperanza during their time at the clinic. Her own property included several acres of pasture land that had been unused since her last horse had passed away 2 years earlier, and she offered to provide a permanent home for Esperanza, with the understanding that Maya could visit whenever she was in town and maintain an active role in the mare's ongoing care. But Carmen had an even better idea, one that had been forming in her mind during the long drive from Phoenix and the emotional conversations with Maya about their shared future. She had been thinking about making some changes in her own life, inspired by Maya's story and their reunion, and the possibility of creating something entirely new together. "What if we moved back to the ranch?" she suggested, her voice tentative but filled with growing excitement. "I own a small property outside Phoenix that's been sitting vacant since I moved into town for work. There's plenty of room for Esperanza, and you could be with her every day. I've been wanting to get back to country living anyway, and this might be the perfect opportunity for both of us to start over." The ranch property was everything Carmen had promised and more. A testament to dreams deferred but not abandoned. The small adobe house sat on 20 acres of desert landscape dotted with mesquite trees and decapara, towering saguaro cacti that created a natural cathedral under the endless Arizona sky. A red barn and corral provided perfect accommodations for Esperanza, and the vast open spaces seemed to promise unlimited possibilities for healing and growth. The logistics of transporting a horse from one state to another were complex and expensive, involving health certificates, travel arrangements, and coordination between veterinarians in different jurisdictions. But the community that had rallied around Maya and Esperanza's story stepped up once again with the generosity that had characterized their response from the beginning. A local horse trailer company donated transportation, and Dr. Vance coordinated with a veterinarian in Phoenix to ensure Esperanza would have proper care during the transition and access to ongoing medical support in her new home. The farewell gathering at Dr. Vance's Cass clinic was bittersweet, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another in a story that had captured the imagination of everyone involved. Father Miguel offered a blessing for the journey ahead, asking for protection and guidance for both Maya and Esperanza as they embarked on their new adventure together. Rosa presented Maya with a scrapbook filled with photos and mementos from her time at the shelter, a reminder that even the most difficult experiences could contain moments of connection and growth. Dr. Vance gave Maya a comprehensive care manual for Esperanza and made her promise to call with regular updates about the mare's adjustment to her new environment. "You saved her life," Dr. Vance told Maya as they loaded Esperanza into the transport trailer, with careful attention to every detail of her comfort and safety. "But I think she saved yours too, in a different way. Sometimes we find exactly what we need in the most unexpected places, and sometimes the act of caring for someone else teaches us how to care for ourselves." The journey to Phoenix took 2 days, with overnight stops to rest and check on Esperanza's condition during what was undoubtedly a stressful experience for an animal who had already endured more than her share of upheaval and uncertainty. Maya rode in the cab of the truck with the driver, a gentle giant named Carlos, who shared stories about the many horses he had transported over the years, each with their own personality and needs that required dull understanding and patience. Carmen followed in her car, and they formed a small caravan carrying hope and new beginnings toward the Arizona desert. 3 lives that had been brought together by circumstances that none of them could have predicted or planned. The landscape changed gradually as they traveled west, from the urban density of Maya's former home to the open spaces that would define her new life, each mile representing a step away from the past and toward possibilities that were still taking shape. Carmen's ranch was a revelation to Maya, who had never lived anywhere with so much space and silence after years of crowded shelters and urban noise. The small adobe house sat like a jewel in the desert landscape, its thick walls and red tile roof designed to withstand the extremes of desert weather while providing a cool refuge from the intense heat of summer days. 20 acres of desert stretched in all directions, dotted with native plants that had adapted to thrive in conditions that would challenge less resilient species. The red barn and corral were perfectly suited to Esperanza's needs, with stalls that were clean and spacious, water systems that provided fresh drinking water automatically, and fencing that was strong enough to contain a large animal while allowing her to see the vast landscape that surrounded her new home. Maya spent hours exploring the property with Carmen, learning about desert ecology and the practical aspects of maintaining property in an environment that was completely different from anything she had known. Maya's adjustment to her new life wasn't without challenges that tested both her resilience and Carmen's commitment to their relationship. She enrolled in the local high school, where she had to navigate new social dynamics and academic expectations, while dealing with the emotional aftermath of everything she had experienced. Some days, the old feelings of isolation and abandonment would creep back in, making her wonder if she truly belonged anywhere, or if this new stability was just another temporary situation that would eventually fall apart. The academic transition was particularly difficult, as Maya discovered that her education at various schools and through independent study during her homeless period had left gaps in her knowledge that made some subjects challenging. She struggled with advanced mathematics and science courses, while excelling in literature and history, subjects that allowed her to draw on her experiences and natural intelligence rather than formal preparation she had missed. But Esperanza was always there, a constant reminder of resilience and the power of healing through love and dedicated care. The mare had adapted beautifully to her new environment, thriving in the desert climate and open spaces that allowed her to move freely and express natural behaviors that had been impossible in the confined space behind the abandoned lot. Her coat had regained its full luster, her injured leg had healed completely, and her personality had emerged as playful and affectionate, forming bonds not just with Maya, but with Carmen as well. Carmen proved to be a devoted guardian, who slowly became the mother figure Maya had never known she needed. despite the awkward beginning of their relationship and the years of separation that had preceded their reunion. They worked together to restore the ranch, repairing fences and updating facilities, while learning to navigate their new relationship through shared labor and common goals. Carmen's guilt over her previous abandonment evolved into determination to provide Maya with every opportunity she had missed, including college preparation and exposure to experiences that would broaden her horizons. The process of building trust between Maya and Carmen was gradual and sometimes frustrating, marked by moments of connection and periods of withdrawal as both women learned to communicate across the gap created by years of separation and different life experiences. Carmen had to learn to respect Maya's independence and hard-won self-reliance, while Maya had to learn to accept help and guidance from an adult who genuinely cared about her welfare without expecting anything in return. Maya began volunteering at a local animal rescue organization, using the experience she had gained caring for Esperanza to help other abandoned and injured animals that came through their doors. She discovered a talent for working with traumatized horses, perhaps because she understood on a visceral level what it meant to be hurt and frightened and in need of gentle, patient care that didn't try to rush the healing process or force trust before it was ready to develop naturally. The work was emotionally demanding, but deeply satisfying, providing Maya with a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own needs and circumstances. She learned about animal behavior, basic veterinary care, and the complex factors that led to animal abandonment and abuse. More importantly, she learned that her own experiences of trauma and recovery had given her insights and skills that could help other creatures who had been damaged by neglect or cruelty. As her senior year of high school approached, Maya faced new questions about her future that were both exciting and overwhelming in their implications. College applications and career choices seemed like luxuries that she had never expected to consider, given the uncertainty that had characterized most of her adolescence. But her experience with Esperanza had sparked a passion for veterinary medicine, and she began researching programs that would allow her to combine her love of animals with her desire to help others who were facing difficult circumstances. Dr. Vance became a long-distance mentor, providing guidance about veterinary schools and encouraging Maya to pursue her dreams with the same determination she had shown in caring for Esperanza. Their regular phone calls covered not just practical matters like course selection and application procedures, but deeper questions about finding meaning and purpose in work that served others rather than simply providing brass income or status. Father Miguel stayed in touch as well, sending occasional letters filled with news from the shelter and reminders of how proud he was of the young woman Maya had become. His correspondence often included philosophical reflections about the nature of calling and service, ideas that helped Maya understand that her desire to help animals might be part of a larger pattern of caring that had characterized her entire life, even during its most difficult periods. The one-year anniversary of finding Esperanza became a celebration of transformation and new beginnings that brought together all the threads of Maya's journey into a single moment of recognition and gratitude. Carmen organized a small gathering at the ranch, inviting some of Maya's new friends from school and the animal rescue, creating an opportunity to share their story with people who had become important to Maya's new life. As Maya stood in the corral with Esperanza, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple that seemed to set the entire landscape on fire, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and possibility. The transformation seemed almost magical when viewed from the perspective of where they had started. Two broken creatures who had found each other in an abandoned lot and somehow managed to heal together. Esperanza had grown sleek and strong, her coat shining like burnished copper in the evening light, and her movement displaying the natural grace and power that had been hidden beneath layers of neglect and suffering when Maya first found her. The mare's injured leg had healed completely, leaving only the faintest scar as a reminder of her difficult past, and she moved with confidence and joy that spoke of an animal who felt safe and loved in her environment. Maya had changed too, though her transformation had been less visible and more profound than the physical healing that had restored Esperanza's health. The frightened, isolated girl who had lived at the shelter had evolved into a confident young woman with a clear sense of purpose and a deep understanding of her own strength and capabilities. The walls she had built around her heart had been replaced by bridges that connected her to family, community, and future possibilities she was only beginning to explore. "You know what I realized?" Maya said to Carmen as they watched Esperanza graze in the evening light, her movements unhurried and content. "I always thought I saved her, but really, we saved each other. She taught me that being abandoned doesn't mean you're worthless, and that sometimes the greatest love comes from the most unexpected places." Carmen nodded, her eyes misty with emotion, as she watched her niece stroke the mare's neck, with hands that were gentle but confident. "Your grandmother always said that everything happens for a reason, even when we can't see it at the time. Maybe you needed to find Esperanza, and maybe she needed to find you, so that you could both find your way home." The news story about Maya and Esperanza had a lasting impact that extended far beyond their personal transformation, creating ripple effects that continued to influence people and policies months after the initial broadcast. Dr. Vance reported a significant increase in donations to her clinic's fund for treating abandoned and injured animals, and several other veterinarians in the region began offering similar programs. Inspired by the community response to Maya's story, and recognizing the need for accessible veterinary care for animals whose owners couldn't afford treatment, the Riverside Community Shelter started a pet assistance program, recognizing that the bond between humans and animals could be a crucial element in helping people rebuild their lives and maintain stability during difficult transitions. The program provided temporary boarding for pets belonging to shelter residents, ensuring that people didn't have to choose between housing and keeping beloved animals who provided emotional support and companionship. Father Miguel began telling Maya and Esperanza's story during his homilies, using it as an example of how love and compassion could transform even the most difficult circumstances and create connections that transcended the boundaries that usually separated people from each other's struggles. The story became part of his regular repertoire of parables about faith, hope, and the importance of caring for the most vulnerable members of society. The abandoned lot, where Maya had first found Esperanza, was eventually purchased by a local nonprofit organization and converted into a community garden, with raised beds and fruit trees that provided fresh produce for the shelter and other social service agencies in the area. A small plaque near the entrance recognized the spot as the place where hope had been found in the most unlikely circumstances, serving as a reminder that healing and transformation could emerge from the most unpromising beginnings. As Maya prepared for college, studying veterinary science at Arizona State University with a full scholarship funded partly by donations from people who had been moved by her story, she often returned in her mind to that moment when she first heard Esperanza's weak whinnying behind the broken wall. She had been looking for aluminum cans to trade for pocket change, focused on the immediate needs of survival that had characterized her daily existence for months. Instead, she had found something far more valuable than money or even security, proof that healing was possible, that love could overcome abandonment, and that sometimes the act of saving someone else was the key to saving yourself. The discovery had changed the trajectory of both their lives in ways that neither of them could have imagined, creating a story that continued to inspire others long after the initial crisis had been resolved. Maya graduated as valedictorian of her high school class, delivering a speech about resilience and the power of unexpected connections that brought several audience members to tears. She spoke about the importance of recognizing that every living creature had value and deserved care, regardless of their circumstances or apparent usefulness to human society. Her words carried the authority of someone who had lived those principles, rather than simply studied them, and the response from the audience reflected the impact of authentic experience shared with honesty and humility. Esperanza stood in the corral that day, her ears pricked forward, as if she could hear Maya's voice carried on the desert wind. The mare had become something of a local celebrity, with visitors often stopping by the ranch to meet the horse whose story had touched so many hearts. But for Maya, Esperanza remained simply the friend who had appeared when she needed help most, the living reminder that even in the darkest moments, love could take root and flourish. As Maya looked toward her future, studying to become the kind of veterinarian who would never turn away an animal in need, She carried with her the lessons learned in that abandoned lot behind the textile factory. The experience had taught her that sometimes the broken find the broken, and together they become whole, creating something stronger and more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. A bond between a homeless girl and a wounded horse had changed everything, proving that miracles could emerge from the most ordinary moments when hearts were open to recognizing them.